I am extremely excited for today's podcast because we have our first guest in the history of the Mound Visit podcast. And this guest is extra special to me because I got to coach him in the Minnesota Twins organization. Cade Povich is now in the Baltimore Orioles organization, where he has been absolutely dominating AAA. He is just one call away from the big leagues, and he's going to give us some really good insight into a lot of his thought process and how he focuses on executing one pitch at a time. And we're also going to peel back the onion a little bit on the earlier stages of his career, of going from being a high school pitcher in the low 80s to then going the junior college route and then going to the Division I level before entering pro ball. He's going to share some really cool stories and insights in his experiences and what has ultimately led him to where he is at now. So without further ado, let's jump into the episode. All right, we are live, and we officially have our first guest ever in the Mound Visit podcast. And the person we have on today, I actually know pretty well. I got to work with him a good amount in Minnesota. And one of the things I just want to tell a short story about the first time I met you, Cade, or one of the first times I met you, was you were throwing a bullpen, and I was watching all your pitches, and I was like, man, you got a really good sweeper. And I asked you about it or how long you've been throwing it and how you held it. And you're like, well, I just watched a video the other day about Blake Trinan, and this is how he holds it. So I decided to throw it today, and I got the movement the way we wanted it to. So that was like a glimpse into your ability to learn things quickly. I can name some other things with some of the drill work we were doing, mechanical things we were trying to change early on in your career, that you were just able to pick up on things extremely quick with grips, mechanical things. What do you attribute your ability to learning fast to? Because not every player can do that. Not every player can just grab a ball, try a new grip, and they instantly get it or are able to change something mechanically. Like, is this something you've always been good at, as being a fast learner, or what do you attribute that to?
I think, honestly, it's just trying different things. When I was younger, the way I figured out how to throw my cutter was my dad and I. Well, so originally, actually, like, the story started, I wanted to throw, as a young kid does, a bunch of junk ball and curveballs and all this other stuff, just because you see guys in the big leagues do it. And my dad actually always told me, he's like, hey, you're not learning any other pitch or anything like that until you learn a changeup. So sure enough, I went on to YouTube and figured out how to throw a changeup. Next day, I was like, okay, I know how to throw one now. And then I don't know, I guess that's just where it started, kind of. And then it progressed to, being a little younger, you're not wanting to throw inside to a kid and hit him accidentally. So I was always throwing fastballs away, but I was wanting something to throw in. And so we ended up going on YouTube and looking up Mariano Rivera's cutter. And I was like, I could use something like that to throw inside to kids, and I can just throw a normal four seam away. And ended up picking that up pretty quick. And so I guess it's just been seeing something and being like, oh, I think I could do that, and just trying it. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. But for the most part, it's really just been seeing it, and I guess being able to recite how it works and just trying it for myself.
Real quick, everyone, I wanted to let you know about my new course called Pitch Design U. It's set to launch on June 10th. I'm going to be covering the fundamentals of pitch movement, how to throw every single pitch type, as well as knowing which one is right for you, and the analytics behind all pitch types, how, when, and where to use your arsenal. I have a wait list right now where I'm sending weekly insights on details about the course. If you're interested, check out the link in the show notes. All right, back to the show. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And what I'm kind of gathering and just listening to you talk is like, there's a little bit of an aspect of not being afraid to try things or not being afraid to fail in a way. Because there's some guys that I've worked with, and I'm sure you've played with, that they're very iffy about trying new things because they're afraid it's going to make them worse or it's not going to work. But to get better, oftentimes you do have to maybe even go backwards for a second, or at least be willing to put yourself out there to try something new with the hopes of it sticking and lasting. So I think that's a pretty incredible attribute to have. How do you think that ties into some of the coaches you've worked with that maybe have suggested things? Like obviously I know our experience in Minnesota, we were very hands-on and we were pushing a lot of things on guys like yourself to try to improve and change. Are you the type of person that, like, would you consider yourself very coachable to where you're wanting to listen and try things that coaches are saying, or do you kind of pick and choose, what you're going to try from what a coach is telling you? Is there a little bit of a trust aspect of it that you have to gain with a coach before you try everything they tell you?
I think in part, yeah. I think also in part, when I was younger, I really wasn't too good as far as, I mean, I could throw a lot of strikes and I can mix pitches and kind of put it where I wanted to, but I didn't throw overly hard or anything. So it got to a point where, if I wanted to continue playing down the road, I had to start trying different things. So it's like there's, I mean, now there's, I guess, a certain element of like trying to listen to what someone says and then do a little bit of research yourself. But at the same time, it's one of those things, at least for me, where I think, if we work on something and give it a try, and, I can look at the numbers, look at how it feels, look how the results end up being. And if it works, I mean, I'm all in for it. That's kind of the name. I always want to kind of take whatever somebody says. If it's going to make me better, I'm going to apply it and try and work on it. But at the same time, if we work on it, we start kind of getting it to where we want, but then we see the results are falling or there's something not there, then it's like, okay, well, I know what I was doing before. I can kind of switch back to that in a way.
No, that's great. Well, let's take us back a little bit. Like, I know a little bit of your story. Little plug here. I know we both went to South Mountain Community College, and they just beat Central Arizona in the playoffs in the first round, which is a pretty big deal to knock them out. But take us back to junior college. Now, I know you grew up in Nebraska, and then you went to Arizona to play at South Mountain Community College for 1 year. Like, what was your recruiting process like in high school? Did you have a lot of options, or how did you end up at South Mountain?
So I mean, there were a few options as far as junior colleges just around Nebraska, kind of the Midwest area. Um, Late into the summer of my senior year of high school, I kind of started throwing a little bit harder. I mean, nothing crazy. I think I was up to 86, but for the most part, I was maybe sitting 82, 84. Um, but I had an unbelievable senior year, spring and summer, to where Creighton ended up hopping on and just being like, "Hey, like we would love to have you. Um, we want to offer you." And it ended up being one of those things to where it was probably a month or so before I was leaving to go to Arizona, and I was like, I mean, junior college, I have this one Division I offer. Junior college, I can go there, give a year of growth where I know there's a higher chance that I'm going to actually play right away and not sit on the bench and just take a full year of working on stuff, trying to get in the weight room and grow. So I ended up saying, hey, I appreciate the offer, but I feel like it's so late already. I'm going to stick to my commitment to the junior college, which, going back, it was funny actually. I think the way I got in touch with South Mountain was during our fall before my senior year. Our team was tweeting out stat lines and whatever, and one of the assistant coach, Jimmy Turk, was liking a whole bunch of the tweets, but they were only my tweets. So one of my coaches was like, "Hey, we see you have interest in this guy. Are you just like, is it something you're just like following, or do you have actual interest?" Ended up going that they had interest and they wanted to see me throw, so I flew out there. Threw a really good bullpen. I don't know if I was throwing very hard. I was probably somewhere mid 80s, but I was hitting every spot. They said, "We would love to have you." And I think at the time they were a top 25 junior college. and they had, I forget his name, but he was one of the top pitchers um, in junior college as well. So then I ended up going there, and it was, yeah, I loved being in Arizona, and South Mountain was a really good um, kind of spot in my development and in my recruitment.
Yeah, and you dominated to say the least. I was looking up your stats there recently. You were, I think, 10-1 with like a 1-something ERA, just absolutely crushed it. And for those that don't know Arizona JUCO baseball well, like Arizona is one of the best states for junior college baseball. You got Central Arizona, who's always one of the best in the country. Yavapai is good. There's a couple other schools that are really good programs. Like those are some impressive stats. And then you did something that is a little more unique. I would say it's not that common for guys to go to a junior college for just 1 year and then transfer to a Power Five Division I school and play right away. But you did. You transferred to Nebraska after 1 year. I believe this was the COVID year, so things got a little dicey that year. Obviously, you didn't get to play that much that year. But how did that transformation happen? And was Nebraska a dream school because that's where you're from, or how did that develop?
Yeah, it all kind of just ended up working out perfectly. Just the fact, Nebraska, growing up in Nebraska and going to games was something that I had always wanted to be a part of and wanted to go to. Like I always wanted to be in Lincoln. I always wanted to play in Haymarket. Um, but I mean, at the time too, trying to think of, you know, if I wanted to play at the highest level, I knew I would want to go to one of the best teams in the country. So I always kind of had sights on, I mean, teams like Ole Miss or Tennessee, basically a bunch of SEC schools for the most part. That was kind of my goal. Um, and then, I pitched well my freshman year. You know how it goes. You have the 7 inning and the 9 inning. I got lucky. I think I had quite a few complete games because they let me pitch the 7 innings a bunch. So that was really nice. But I ended up doing well in my freshman year. The off season came around. I had a few offers. Creighton offered again. I had kind of like a walk on offer from Arizona, just basically saying it was basically their way of saying, "Hey, we're going to watch you next year," knowing that I wasn't taking that. And then just I think Tennessee and Auburn were a couple other teams that were just on the phone with my coaches for the following year. But one thing we always did living back home was my mom and I would take my dad to a College World Series game for Father's Day. So we ended up going to one of those games, and it happened that a day or two before that, the coaching staff at Nebraska basically just said they were leaving. Like the head coach said he was leaving, um, and the whole staff was going with him. So whenever the new staff was announced, it was on Father's Day. We were sitting there, and Coach Arvell from he had texted me and said, "Hey, this is Coach Arvell. I'm going to be one of the new coaches on Coach Bolt's staff. We would love to talk to you, have you down for a visit, um, and get to know you a little bit." So obviously, sitting there, I'm like kind of in shock because they were telling me I was one of their first guys that they were looking towards, and just being a Nebraska kid, I thought it was really cool. So we ended up going on the visit, and like I think kind of my whole childhood of going to games in Memorial and going to games at Haymarket to watch baseball, it just kind of came to light, and my eyes just opened, just to how amazing everything is, and what a dream come true it kind of was. And we went on the visit, met with Coach Bull, did all that, and then wasn't decided on anything really. But we went to lunch, and I remember sitting there. I was like, "This is what I want. I want to commit here. It's perfect as far as I grew up here. I've always wanted to be a Husker. It's close to where my parents, family, friends, anybody can drive 45 minutes from Omaha or down the road in Lincoln to watch. And I guys like Alex Gordon, Jabba Chamber, like I want to be part of one of the great pitchers that is or players and pitchers that have come out of um, Nebraska, and just the way 2020 and COVID year just ended up working out. I mean, it was perfect decision. It was like God was telling me, to take this, because who knows if I go back to South Mountain and it's COVID year, what ends up happening.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, that whole year just changes everything. So yeah, you never know what one decision, how that can impact the rest of your life and where you go from there. What do you think was the biggest adjustment for you from junior college baseball to Division One? Now, I had a similar transition. I went to a D1, not a Power Five school, but still D1. So there's still a little bit of a difference of just being at a 4-year school in general. The junior college lifestyle is a little bit different. Not a lot of rules with baseball, so you can practice whenever you want. School, at least in my experience, was a little bit lighter in junior college. So there's just a lot of changes on the field, off the field. But for you, like, what were some of the biggest adjustments to the lifestyle of being at a 4-year school, and also just the competition of playing against some really big schools?
Yeah, for one, was getting used to metal bats again, coming from South Mountain. It was nice pitching to the wood bats my freshman year. um, but I mean, part of it is just like you're facing guys. It's not guys that are either your age or a year older. You have 4-year seniors, fifth-year seniors that you're potentially going up against, and I mean, we had what was going to be a pretty tough schedule. I mean, we had a pretty tough kind of first half before COVID hit, and then in 21 it was all Big Ten. But I'm pretty sure our season, if it wasn't for COVID in 21, would have been a really cool and tough start as well, just with the teams we faced. But just kind of getting over that hump of like, you're facing older guys. You got to be a little more strategic. They're a little more experienced, and then just, but it also helped learn from guys on your team that were older and kind of what they do. But like you said, Todd didn't. Todd had us out there for a while during those practices at South Mountain. So a little part of it, I think, was getting used to it kind of being more of a 50-50 split between schoolwork and practice, and then trying to figure out kind of how to handle free time, and what to do away from the field. Just in part that we weren't at the field for 6 hours a day.
Yeah, for sure. What was I going to say? Lost my train of thought. So for players, let's just think of, you redoing this whole process or giving advice to other kids that are in a similar position versus junior college, going to a 4-year school out of high school. Like, what do you think are some factors that high school kids should consider when comes to going to a JUCO or going to a 4-year school out of high school?
I think a lot of it, and I've told a bunch of kids this, I think a lot of it comes down to, you need to take the ego part out of it. I'm going to a Division 1 kind of ego that a lot of kids have. And I mean, when you're coming out of high school and everybody's committing, and you put that Division 1 commit, it's really cool. But I think you really got to think, where you stand when you're going into that school, especially now with the transfer portal. You're going to be going into guys that are experienced, or in some cases they're all Americans, and you got to be real. You're not going to be starting right away, and you got to see who they have behind that guy as well. And you don't want to be one of those guys that goes there because of all the hype, and then sits for 2 years, ends up not playing, transfers to 3, 4 different schools. When you can go to a junior college, play pretty much right away, um, develop a ton just with how, at least at South Mountain, with how the regulations or lack of regulations, it was basically all hard work. And Gillum was really good with the weight room stuff. Um, and then at the field, the amount of work I think we did, majority of it too was for a purpose. So it helped develop a lot of guys. But you really got to figure out if you're going to be one of those guys at a D1, or if you're going to go there, sit, not enjoy it, and then not develop as much as you could have if you went to a junior college. Um, but I mean, at the same time, if you're one of those guys who is a dude and could start right away, I mean, then albeit do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always a tough balance because obviously you get recruited by a big school. Like you said, the ego comes into where you're like, okay, this is a big deal. I want to be a guy that's committing to Vanderbilt, or I'm committing to Ole Miss. And it's hard to have the perspective of, what are the chances of me actually playing? Like I would think most kids have the mindset that, oh, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to win a spot, and I'm going to be in the rotation as a freshman. So it's tough to have the perspective of having confidence in yourself and belief in yourself that you can do something, but also being realistic about the situation and who's in front of you. So I think it's like, I always like to think about understanding what is the most important thing to you. Like, are you someone that feels like you need to get innings right away as a freshman and that's important to you? Is baseball the primary thing, or is it secondary? Are you going primarily for the school first and the baseball is just secondary to it? There's all those other angles to it, but like for guys that want to play right away, in a lot of cases, going the junior college route or going to a smaller school instead of the big Power 5 school could be a good option too. It's just, it's a really tough answer and balance, especially when you're 16, 17 years old making these commitments. And if you don't have parents that have necessarily been through a similar process, or people just in your life in general that are able to give you wisdom on some of those things, it can be a tough decision. But for me personally, I thought the junior college route was great for me. I got to pitch a lot right away and develop. And now I gave myself an extra 2 years to get more physical, get more mature. And now when I did transfer to, a 4-year school, I was able to play right away. So there isn't a perfect answer, but I really like the way, you put that. And, obviously your route worked for you. So now we're shifting to pro ball. You've been in pro ball for, this is what, year 4 now for you. You got drafted in 21. Going into, your draft year in 21, was there high expectations that you were going to be a fairly high pick before the spring even started, or did you kind of develop later in the spring and got on people's radars?
I think it started in kind of the COVID summer. I took most of the off season, or most of, I guess, what would have been the 2020 season, basically lifting. Throughout the week, I would do, I guess, in a sort of Velo program, in a way, as my pens on Wednesday, and then I think Saturdays, I want to say, we would throw live at bats. We kind of had this small facility. Me, another guy, shout out to Southworth for doing that for us. It was his place that he let it open so that guys could. Some of us there were a couple pitchers that would go in, and then we would have a couple hitters as well that were able to hit, just so we could kind of take that time to throw to each other, have somewhat of, I guess, a season. But then fortunately too, Coach Gillum, coach at South Mountain, was also the assistant for the Savannah Bananas when they were a college team in the summer. And that league ended up saying that the Coastal Plain Leagues ended up saying that they were going to stay open. I know the Cape and a bunch of other summer leagues teams were shutting down. So I was thankful that I was able to play summer ball, because Gillum had reached out and said, hey, we would love to have you play for us. And that was really nice, just in the fact that I could throw to actual games. It's a different region that haven't been in on the East Coast, and maybe this being one of the only summer leagues really open, maybe I could catch the eye of some scouts leading into 21. So it ended up being that one of my first starts, I think. Um, I was sitting maybe 88, 91, but I was in the first couple innings, I was sitting like 91, 92 up to 93, which that was the hardest I had thrown in a game up to that point. And one of the guys from D1 baseball ended up being there, and I threw really well. And obviously, that was threw harder than I had in the 2020 season or any time before. So I ended up catching his eye a little bit, and I ended up getting kind of like a little one of those reports on me. And then I think that just kind of led into the 21 season to where there was a little bit of, I guess, speak of me around. But I don't think it was anything where I was going to be a crazy round pick or anything like that. But I ended up getting the Friday spot there. And, I threw really well. I got pitcher of the week, I think, 3 times that year. And then was on the first team All Big Ten in 21. And so I think I just ended up having a great year. My stuff jumped, and then I was fortunate to be picked by the Twins.
Yeah, and you went high. So you just said, you didn't think you were necessarily going to be a high pick, but we took you in the third round, which, I mean, third round is pretty high in my book. So, I mean, I think we drafted our first 3 picks were pitchers. We had Petty, Hadger, and then you in the third round. Pretty good trio of pitchers right there. And one thing that was interesting, and I'd love to hear your journey and perspective on your velocity gain over the years, because now you've been up to, I want to say you've been up to 96, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
And you're sitting more in that 93, 94 range versus when you first got drafted. I remember looking at your report of your college numbers, and you were, for the most part, 89, 91. And I want to say within your first month of being with us in Minnesota, you hit 95. And I remember there being a specific game. I don't know if it was like I think it might've been Instructs. You're like, I think I'm going to hit 95 today. And literally like the first pitch or second pitch of the outing, you hit 95. Just another thing that I loved about you is just, you have a lot of confidence, but it's like a quiet confidence. It's not like you're outwardly expressing like how good you think you are, but like you can tell watching you pitch that you believe in yourself and you have confidence in yourself, which I absolutely love. But take us a little bit on your velocity journey of what you think kind of helped you go from being a high 80s guy, at Nebraska, touching low 90s, to now being a guy that's touching mid 90s.
I think a part of it was, I've done plyos for a long time, and I think part of it was just making sure I was doing them with a purpose and doing them, I guess, for a specific reason. I think there's a lot of good habits just with plyos and throwing in general that can be taught, but you have to make sure that you're implying those good habits and, not creating negative ones, because you pick up on the negative habits a lot quicker and a lot easier than you do the positive ones. So I mean, I remember we had talked about what plyos and how to do plyos a certain way to where, it was more on that positive side, and to be deliberate with them, to where they're going to transfer over. And I think doing that, and then kind of on those medium days when we work on the mound, we would get a bunch of reps in and get the mechanics more efficient to where I was actually kind of using my lower body and getting as much force as I could into the ground. And I don't know if you remember, but my front leg has always been, I think, one of the weakest links. So we hammered that a bunch, and that continued to get better. And I think as that got better, so did the velocity.
Yep. I do remember that specifically. Every once in a while I look at videos on my phone just of past drills to use as examples, and I still have a good amount of videos of you from the front view where I'm sitting like on the ground in front of the mound and we're watching that lead leg because your knee tended to bow out towards third base a little bit before it would extend back. And yeah, like you're exactly right. As you improve that, your velo started to go up because you're able to transfer energy up the chain much quicker. So what has been, we talked about adjustments from from high school to college. Was there a bigger adjustment from college to pro ball, or would you say it was about the same as just kind of getting used to the lifestyle?
Some of it was the same. I think there was more to it as you kind of as I have kind of progressed throughout pro ball so far. I think the more I've gotten up, the lower levels, in a way, there didn't feel like there's too much difference. You're basically similar age as everybody. Everybody's kind of on the younger side in low A. I mean, especially after the draft, guys getting put in. There's a bunch of like high school guys, then college guys as well that I may have played with or played against. But as you move up, you start getting into more of a mix of. Double A has guys that are pretty experienced. Most of them are a little bit younger, but there's also that amount that are older. And then obviously in AAA, you're in with a bunch of guys who are all different ages. I think our team here in Norfolk is probably one of the youngest, as far as it's just loaded with prospects for almost the most part. But looking at other teams, I remember when I first got called up to AAA last year, I was just in the dugout watching the game, and the team we were playing, looking on the scoreboard, and it was like every guy has already debuted 2-3 years ago. So they have that experience. They've played in the big leagues. And I think the big thing for me was realizing like they have that experience and they're much older and they're obviously really good. They're in AAA. They've been to the show for a reason. And I think part of me was not idolizing that they were like these great players and whatnot, but just the fact that in my head I was thinking about how good these guys are, and like this is like I'm in AAA, like I'm one step away. These guys are like this is really, really good players and whatnot. And part of me had to step back in the off season this year and be like, there definitely is. Yeah, there's a lot of really good guys in AAA, but there's a lot more really good guys and all-stars in the major leagues, which is where we end up wanting to be. And while they're really good, man, hitting is hard. And you got to remind yourself of that. And, they were in your shoes once where they were young and, they probably saw the guys up top as being these really good ball players. And they are obviously, but you also have to take a step back and realize what the game is and not get too carried away and into thinking how good someone is, because at the end of the day, those hitters that are really good still fail almost 70% of the time.
Right. No, that's a good perspective. And yeah, I can imagine it can be easy to get starstruck in a way, especially if there's a guy you're playing AAA, like you said, that has big league time that maybe you were watching on TV while you were still in college and now you're pitching against him. And it can be easy to lose sight of, okay, I'm here for a reason. I can still get this guy out. I don't want to let who this is in the box affect my mindset and the way I'm attacking him. And evidently you have made that adjustment from last year to this year because you're crushing it this year. You've just been lights out every start and have been doing really well. I'm curious, diving into the mental side a little bit now of being in AAA, you're dominating right now and you are one call away. How do you keep yourself in check mentally to not look too far to the future of like, hey, maybe if I have one more good start, I'm going to get called up to the big leagues? Or if you see someone's underperforming in the big leagues, that maybe you're going to get the next opportunity. Like, how do you keep yourself level headed and focusing one day at a time?
Well, I mean, like you said, it's focusing on one day at a time. That's kind of been my biggest thing this year in general, is just taking everything one day at a time, um, taking everything one batter at a time, one pitch at a time, and really just, I remember thinking, or I remember just in past, in lower levels and stuff in years previous, just being a part of games where something would happen. There's a weak hit that falls, errors, whatever it is. And I remember just getting so upset about it in game, like, come on, like, this is affecting me, blah, blah. But kind of the whole thing as well this year has just been kind of dialing all that back and just controlling what I can. I think the mental side is a huge part of it. And when I was in spring training with the Twins, I ended up getting the mental ABCs of pitching, and I started reading that a little bit. And then I remember, I don't know if I forgot the book somewhere, I lost it, but I haven't read it since. And then kind of towards the end of this spring training, I was at a Barnes and Noble kind of near our facility, and there was one there. So I ended up picking it up, and I've been reading that so far, basically as much as I have been able to this year. And I think that has just helped a lot in aspect of, I can control my delivery. I can control when the ball leaves my hand and where I want it to go. But once it leaves my hand, I have no control over anything else that happens really in the game or in that situation. I can think to execute a pitch, and I can do everything in my power to try and execute that pitch. And, you know, hopefully majority of the time I do execute that pitch, and I get the result that's in my favor. Um, but at the same time, you can throw the perfect pitch exactly where you want to with the exact break numbers and whatnot. And, a guy can stick his butt out and throw the bat at it, and it can fall for a hit, or um, you can throw one out of the zone that they somehow hit over the fence. That's just how it works, but that's nothing you can control. As long as you're executing your pitches and doing what you are able to control, it's out of your hands from there.
Yeah, I love that. It's there's so many things outside of your control that if you try to manage all those things, you're just going to go crazy because you can't control for all those other factors of what your fielders do, what the batter does, what the umpire does. So I love that mindset. And speaking of something that is out of your control as well, we kind of went over this one or skipped this one a little bit, but back in 22, you were traded from the Twins to the Orioles right at the deadline, I believe. Like it was the last day of the deadline. What was that like? Like, did you think that you might get traded? Did you hear rumors or anything, or how did you find out, and how did that make you feel to be traded?
Yeah, there was nothing that I knew about. I think if you, it was the day before, I want to say, um, or going back, I guess, to my start before. Um, there must have been a good amount of, I can't remember exactly where we were playing, but there must have been a good amount of scouts in the stands or something, because I remember coming back. We might have been in Wisconsin against the Timber Rattlers, but I remember, if I don't know if you remember, Bobby Malachy made a joke to me just about how there were scouts in the stands and whatnot. And it was going into the last day, so nobody really thought of anything, wasn't hearing anything. And he was just we were joking around in general, just with the amount of scouts there, that any one of us could get traded. And we were putting them kind of back and forth, like, hey, you did good today. They were up there watching. And then going to the last day, I was on the phone, I think, with my now fiance, and um, was getting a call from Hassan, and I was like, he doesn't ever call me really, so I should probably answer this. Answer it, and he's just telling me, um, hey, like we just want to know this is really good for you. Um, just kind of giving me the whole workup on it basically before just saying, hey, we made this move and um, you're gonna go to the Orioles. And at the time, I mean, I think I was also in my bedroom at our host family's house, getting ready to go to um, the field for our game that night. And I remember thinking afterwards, like, not really knowing what to think or what to expect. Just in the fact that, you always think you're going to stick with the team for basically your whole development or as long as possible. And I think part of it too was like thinking of it in a bad way and not realizing, the bigger picture of, how this is getting traded, being one of the main pieces in a trade for a guy who was at the time an all-star closer is, I mean, that's huge. And that um, kind of gives an insight of the work that you're doing and, how much other teams are noticing. And I think kind of just at that time being my first year, you don't really realize that. You just think you're getting traded and you don't realize how good of a thing it is until you really look at it from more of a broader perspective. Um, and that was one thing I kind of had to understand and realize. I think just talking to agent coaches and parents and getting an understanding of how good that actually is.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, you got traded for uh, the Orioles closer at the time, who was an all-star that year. I forget what his first name was. Lopez was his last name. I can't remember. Jorge, maybe Jorge Lopez.
Yep.
So yeah, you were the main piece in that. And yeah, it was the same thing earlier that year. We traded Chase Petty, our high school first rounder from the year before. We traded him to the Reds, and he was, devastated in a way at the beginning because you almost look at the negative at first of, okay, the Twins don't want me for whatever reason, they want to get rid of me. But like Petty, he got traded for Sonny Gray, who was the Twins ace for the next couple of years.
Yep.
Like it's a big deal to get traded because that means the other team sees a ton of value in the future, right? Like, so the Reds saw value in Petty in their future. The Orioles saw you as value in their future by trading, their best relief pitcher at the time, knowing that the future is going to be bright if we can get someone like Cade Povich on our staff. So it's like looking at it from that angle might make it a little bit easier of a transition. But and I think so far it is definitely paying off in the Orioles' favor, that trade, to say the least. But walk through a little bit. I know Josh, I want you to jump in on this too. So Josh, you were traded as well from the Phillies to Texas, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was during the off season versus Cade, you were during the season. What was it like joining a new team, at the end of the year with guys that you've really never met or played with, and they're kind of in their own groove and have been playing together for the last, 4 or 5 months?
Yeah, it was. I mean, that was kind of a big part, just in the fact that, um, at the end of the year, guys kind of you've had basically almost a whole season together, and me being already a guy who's kind of shy, I was going over there not knowing really what to expect, and I wasn't high at the time. I was hoping to maybe be trade when I got traded, maybe go make the jump to Double A. Um, and in the same part, you go over and you're not really sure what to expect as far as what this other team's going to do, pitch development wise and whatnot. So it was a little bit of adjustment, just trying to sit back and meet everybody, learn kind of the way the Orioles take things and take on pitching development and the things that they prioritize and just listen to kind of their thoughts and on both sides, get to know the org, the players, and everything a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Josh, what was your experience like being traded?
Yeah, so I was actually the same. I got traded during the trade deadline, actually.
Oh,
Yeah, and so yeah, it was pretty weird. Social media knew before I got any kind of calls. I remember I was chilling with my friends, and then they showed me a post on Twitter, and they're like, "Yeah, Josh Gesser just got traded," and I was like, "What?" Um, so yeah, social media knew before me. Was that the same with you, Cade?
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure they tried to call um, in order for me to kind of know first before I saw it on social media. But I remember as soon as I got done, I'm pretty sure my parents and a bunch of friends were blowing me up. So it was probably right at the around the same time.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I just want to quickly jump in, and I'm super interested in how you actually throw your pitches because now you're just absolutely dominating the minor leagues, and I'm just super interested in if you have a ball, like if you can just take us through how you throw each one of your pitches.
Yeah, I have a plyo ball. It's tough because
That's
today
fine.
being the off day, I throw tomorrow, so I don't like taking the day before off. But I thought I had a baseball in my bag. I usually always do. It's not like me, but I can try and use this plyo. So basically, like my four seam, I just throw typical four seam horseshoe, kind of on the outside. I remember, I think at Nebraska, I just had the horseshoe on the inside, and we switched it around just to get the seams to work better, to get a little bit more carry. Um, and then my changeup is kind of, I guess I'll use the driveline logo. I don't know if you can see that as like
mhm.
the seam, but I try and kind of go along the seam, and kind of put these two fingers inside of the one seam to where when I throw it, it's basically got that one seam effect. Just because, I've tried. I mean, we talked in the off season. I
Yep.
tried kind of doing more of a supinated one. I had always thrown more of a pronated one in the past, but just with the fact that have a good cutter and a good slider, we're just looking at the fact that I could supinate pretty well. So we were trying that and playing catch with it. I was like, I'm gonna have such a good change up. Like I can't wait. And then something about when I went on the mound and just got my spine, I guess, more involved in it and was throwing it, just didn't do anything. And it was basically a slow fastball. And I was like, all right, well, we got to scratch that. So now it's more kind of along this one seam. It's almost like a slower one seam fastball, but it's been getting a lot more depth than my old one, and then it's been taken off and playing way better. Um, and then my cutter is my fastball grip, but I go on the other side. So I go. This is actually my agent talking with him, Alex Wilson. He played in the bigs for I want to say 8 years. So it's nice to have him kind of on my side as well. But I go on the opposite side of my four seam. So I guess if the logo is kind of like the horseshoe where it's that way, my cutter I throw this way where it's inside, and I turn it a little bit, and then I basically put all the pressure. I have my middle finger sitting on that seam, and I put almost all the pressure there, and just throw it like a fastball, and it keeps a good amount of carry, and then I think it is around 2 to 4 on the right side, as far as if you're looking at a movement plot.
But just to
And I've
verify
been
real
able to
quick,
throw that more around 88, 90, been up to 92 with it. Um,
that's a firm pitch. Real quick, I just want to show you because I have a base. I want to make sure I understand it correctly.
mhm.
So this would be your regular four seam, right? So
Yep.
horseshoe on the inside, and you're throwing your cutter like this, or is it still the horseshoe on the outside?
No, yeah, it'd be like that. So it'd be
It'd be like
like,
this, yep,
yeah, it'd
and
be like
slightly
that.
tilted.
Yep. pressure, not that much tilted. I just like it's literally just like
Just like a little bit.
just the smallest little tilt, fingers together, and then basically like almost my middle finger pushing down, and then almost the pad even of my index finger, like not even really on the ball. Just really trying to get that
Yeah.
when I throw it, just give that little turn to kind of shift the axis into where I want to. And sometimes, I mean, I've had somewhere it's still around 90 where when like how I normally throw it, but just I maybe get an extra turn on it and it takes off. And I was, man, why can't I throw that one more?
For sure.
But
What's
yeah, so
next?
then,
What's the curveball or the sweeper?
yeah, so the curveball, just typical kind of, if these were the two seams, I just go along the two seam, um, spike it, and then I kind of put my thumb more directly behind it, just kind of get it out of the way when it turns over. And then the sweeper is also on the two seams. So if we're just on the two seams here, I take the index fingers, still the same kind of trying in one that I learned. Move it on the outside of the two seams and do this kind of baby spike to it in a way. Um, and then I was watching a recent video of Bauer in Mexico talking to one of his teammates on how he throws his. And so lately I've been just putting a lot of focus on pressure on the index finger actually. So it's not as much as like the cutter, how I have almost all pressure on the middle finger, but I do put a little extra focus on the index finger just for really being able to kind of push it as I kind of let it spin. So I think it's helped just kind of focus more on getting here rather than, I mean, sometimes just trying to throw like a fastball, it get more
Yep.
here, starts to gyre a little bit, doesn't get as much sweep. Kind of like what we talked about a little bit in the off
Yep.
season when we had talked about it. Um, and so I think here just gives that extra focus of staying on it a little bit longer and giving it more of that 3 o'clock rotation, which is super important to get just from kind of where my arm slot is.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love those. Those are great grips. Really good insight. Well, we won't take too much more of your time, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of your routines. Like, what is your throwing and lifting look like in between starts?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you can maybe attest a little bit to it. I used to throw a ton in between starts and just in every aspect in a way. Um, I mean, I remember in the past bullpens, I'd throw 25 to up to 30 sometimes, and then um, pregame, I would um, throw a bunch on the mound, and then throw probably around 25 pitches as well in the pregame bullpen. So I've dialed back on that a ton. Um, and a lot of big part of that is talking with our new pitching coach with the Orioles, Drew French, during spring training when I was in big league camp. And he had talked a little bit about just being around, guys who have been all stars in the past. And so now I've dialed it back to where the day after in my light days, I keep pretty light where I almost like I'll do bands, warm up the arm a little bit, but I pretty much won't do much plyos. I'll do super light throwing. I won't really let anything go. Just kind of move the arm basically. Um, like a day before, I'll extend it a little bit more, but that's just kind of doing maybe a couple plyo drills just for the next day, kind of getting the feel of stuff. And then like bullpen days, I try to stay um, a little bit higher with the intent on bullpen days just because in games you're going to be moving pretty fast. But I kind of lower the quantity down to where I'm only throwing really 15 or so pitches in a bullpen throughout the week, and not really overly prioritizing, how good of a bullpen it is. I'm really just trying to, if there's something I'm working on, making sure that I get that down. But then at the same time, it's just trying to prepare for the start. I always took, I think, a big part of bullpens being like I had to throw a good bullpen, like I need, like, things got to be whatever, but you don't get outs in bullpens. And French too. um so I think he was the assistant with the Braves the years before. So I actually threw against the Braves at the Braves place in spring training, and he made the introduction to Max Fried for me, which was really cool. Someone that I get compared to all the time, and someone I had started watching a bunch in college. And talking to him, a bunch of it was like, your job and the goal is just to get outs, and it doesn't really matter how. And kind of taking that into a week, you're not getting outs in a bullpen. You're working on stuff, but you're also trying to maximize how you feel going into your next start. And so kind of taking that role on, not making it anything too crazy or getting too up or down about how a bullpen goes, um, leading into your start, which has helped me, I think, in preparedness, then also just readiness and feel of for that start. I don't feel overworked throughout the week. But then as far as lifting goes, I try and go, obviously, like, depending on where we're at, it's in some places, in some cases, it makes it a little more difficult to have it exactly. But day after a start, I try and go lower body pretty heavy and intense with that lift. And then a bullpen day, I'll do kind of more of an upper body lift. And then usually the day after that is more of a lower body, but kind of a light, I guess, more explosive end lower body workout. And then maybe the day before start, I'll do just like a recovery lift where I'm just kind of moving everything, making sure nothing has like tightened up over the course of lifting or the course of the week, and just making sure my body feels 100% ready. Or, I mean, there's not a lot of times you're fully 100% going into starts, but as close to 100% going into the start, going into the night, to where I can be well rested, well recovered, and ready to go for the next day.
Yeah, it sounds like you've just done a really good job of learning yourself, of doing enough to feel like you're recovering and fully prepared, but you're not overdoing it to where you're just beating yourself up during the week. Because I'm sure as you're figuring out, especially being on like a 5-man rotation, like you have less time to recover. So the more you're doing stuff to tax the body in between outings, like over the course of 25 to 30 starts in a season, like you're going to be a lot more beat up. So it sounds like it's just been a lot of maturity and kind of learning what works for you, over the last couple of years, which is great. How does that change for you during the off season? Like, are you a guy that likes to take a lot of time off from throwing, or are you throwing pretty much year round? Kind of just give us like a quick, rundown of like what an off season would look like for you.
Yeah, I know that's been kind of, I guess, a hot topic recently, just with everybody, how many guys have gone down so far this year, unfortunately. Um, but the way I've looked at it, I think just starting with, basically, I couldn't remember what I did really in college and what those off seasons looked like. But I know after getting drafted and kind of the first, being able to play in the first few, or the last few weeks of low A, and then we had like instructs and whatnot. I remember after that getting somewhat of, or not somewhat, it was pretty detailed, like, off season plan, just as far as like ramping up for next year and whatnot. Um, and kind of also doing a little bit of my own research. Like, I think it's good after the season, especially now playing so many games, to take a couple weeks off just for the arm, for the body, just for everything in general. So far over the past couple of years, basically once our season ends, I won't. Last year I did go. I went to Tread to throw kind of an exit pen, but after that, pretty much 2 weeks, no baseball, no lifting, just kind of enjoy life for those 2 weeks because I mean the off season is a lot of work and um, I'd like to take those 2 weeks, but outside of that, I don't really like taking much more time. Just the research I've done and whatnot. I don't want the the ligaments and stuff and the muscles to tighten up and they've been stretched out and stretched and worked on for a whole season and staying healthy, you don't want them to tighten up and then try and ramp up again. So I try and get back to throwing. Nothing crazy though. I think for the first 2 or 3 weeks it's literally Monday, Wednesday, Friday of super light plyo work. I prefer to do them off the mound just to feel the slope as much as possible, especially in the off season. But a lot of it is super light, working on maybe some mechanic stuff during them, but not really doing any throwing or anything like that afterwards until the third week. I start kind of implementing a little bit more throwing until we ramp it up to 4 times a week, and then progress into more of a full week schedule. And throughout that, I try and lift 4 times a week as well. Just trying to put on as much muscle as possible. I think those 5, 6 weeks when the throwing's light, it's really important to make the weight room extremely heavy, just in the aspect that your focus for majority of the year is on throwing and making sure everything feels good, feels right. um, so when it's that time where that's not really the main focus, that's kind of when the weight room's been a big focus, and that's where I've seen my biggest gains going into when we've really started ramping up the throwing and putting a radar gun back there, whether it's compression throws or getting some readings on some plyos and whatnot.
That's great. Before we go, I know Josh, you might have a couple quick hitters, but this has been really great. I really appreciate the time, Cade. Do you have a couple thoughts, Josh, that you want to finish with?
No, maybe just one last question. So when you're on the mound, what are the couple things that you're thinking about every pitch?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me has been just to execute the pitch. For the most part, my catcher has a good plan. We've got cards and stuff that give a good plan of what's gonna give the best possibility of getting the batter out. And for the most part, I roll with that unless I kind of have a plan in my head on if I saw something in the swing or something feeling really good in that situation, then I want to throw it. But for the most part, the biggest thing has just been the thought process of just execute this pitch, whether there's runners on. Kind of like I said in earlier, that's the only thing I can control is whether or not this pitch is executed, and everything else is out of my hands. And um, I've learned more this year with the pitch clock. In the past, I throw a couple balls and there's really no reset, just in the fact that you're so worried about the clock and getting a violation and whatnot. But a big thing with this year too has been, throw a few balls in a row or don't execute on a few pitches in a row, being able to step off the back of the mound, kind of look at the right field foul pole, just regain that focus back and take a deep breath and be like, all right, let's execute this next one and get back into it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Sounds good.
That was great. Before we let you go, how can people get in contact with you if a player has a question or wants to follow you online? Where's the best way to follow you?
Yeah, I would say Instagram, just at Cade Povich. I know we've talked about Twitter too, I guess a little bit can work. I know we talked about that I had started kind of my own pitching page as well, but funny enough, I ended up before the season started basically deleting Twitter from my phone and iPad and everything. But I'll go on like Safari and go on Twitter here and there just to stay up on, a bunch of just different pitching stuff if I'm curious and whatnot. So I would say best chance is probably Instagram, but maybe I'll go on Twitter once every now and then and at CPO22. I might be on there sometimes too.
Perfect. Awesome, man. Well, really appreciate your time. I know we took up a lot of your time. Just appreciate you sharing the stories and just the details of your process. I think it's going to help a lot of players out there. So thank you, dude.
Yeah, no, this was great. I appreciate you guys having me. Appreciate being the first guest, but no, this was awesome. I'm glad I was able to be a part of it.